Somewhere in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, hidden behind overgrown hedges and rusted iron gates, a mansion stands frozen in time. Its once gleaming white walls are now streaked with grime. Its grand windows stare blankly at nothing. And its massive crystal chandelier, still hanging in the two-story foyer, catches whatever light manages to creep through the dust. This is not a haunted house from a horror film. This is a real place. A 20,000 square foot Italian Baroque style estate that was once owned by one of the most powerful men in American music, Sean Combs, the man the world knows as Diddy. He bought this mansion in 2003 for $2.6 million. He poured money into renovations. He brought in designers and contractors and dreamed of making it the crown jewel of his Atlanta empire. And then, without warning, he abandoned it, left it to rot, sold it for half of what he paid, and never looked back. For years, the mansion sat empty. Vandals stripped its copper pipes. Graffiti crawled across its plaster walls. Nature crept in through broken windows, and the world forgot it ever existed. Until now. Because the story of this abandoned mansion is not just about real estate. It is about a man whose rise was as dazzling as his fall has been devastating. A man who built an empire on ambition and swagger, only to watch it crumble under the weight of secrets that refused to stay buried. To understand why this mansion was left behind, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to the streets of Harlem. Back to a boy who lost his father before he could remember his face. Back to the hunger that drove a kid from the projects to the penthouse. And back to the shadows that followed him every step of the way. Sean John Combs was born on November 4th, 1969, in Harlem, New York City. His mother, Janice Combs, worked as a model who organized fashion shows and later became a teacher's assistant. She was elegant, determined, and fiercely protective of her children. His father, Melvin Earl Combs, was a different story entirely. Melvin was handsome and charismatic. He served in the United States Air Force and later worked at a hair salon. But those were just the daylight versions of his life. In the shadows of Harlem's streets, Melvin Combs was something else. He was a hustler, a drug dealer, a man who ran with some of the most dangerous figures in New York's underworld, including the notorious Frank Lucas, the Harlem kingpin whose life would later inspire the film American Gangster. Frank Lucas would later speak openly about his friendship with Melvin. "We did a lot of business together," Lucas said in an interview years later. Of course, it was not legal business. Melvin would bring young Sean to Lucas's house, where the toddler would play on a little rocking horse, while the men discussed matters that would never be spoken of in polite company. But in 1972, the streets caught up with Melvin Combs. On a cold night, while sitting in his car on Central Park West, he was shot and killed. He was 33 years old. Sean was only 2 years old, too young to remember his father's face, too young to understand why his mother cried, but old enough somehow to carry the weight of that absence for the rest of his life. Janice Combs did everything she could to protect her son from the truth. She told him his father had died in a car accident. She moved the family from Harlem to Mount Vernon, New York, hoping to put distance between her children and the world that had claimed her husband. She worked 3 jobs. Sean's grandmother worked 2 more. Together, they scraped and saved and prayed that the next generation would have a different story. And Sean, even as a young boy, understood. He started his own paper route at an early age. He watched his mother's tireless work ethic and absorbed it into his bones. He saw how hard she fought to give him opportunities, and he made a silent promise to himself. He would not waste them, but the streets have long memories, and Harlem never forgot the name Combs. As Sean grew older, he began to notice something strange. Guys from the neighborhoods always seemed to know his family's last name. They would nod at him with a respect he hadn't earned. They would whisper stories he couldn't quite hear. Eventually, his curiosity won. While studying at Howard University, Sean went to the school library and typed his father's name into a computer. What he found shattered everything he thought he knew. His father hadn't died in a car accident. He had been murdered, shot in a drug deal gone wrong. And the newspapers of the time had painted a picture of a man who lived large and died violently, a kingpin of Harlem whose funeral was attended by his widow draped in chinchilla fur, their toddler son wrapped in mink. The discovery could have destroyed him. Instead, it transformed him. Years later, Diddy would reflect on that moment with remarkable clarity. "I learned early in life that there was only two ways out of that," he said. "Dead or in jail." It made me work even harder. That hunger, that desperate need to escape the fate that had claimed his father, would fuel everything that came next. In the late 1980s, Sean Combs arrived at Howard University in Washington, D.C., with nothing but ambition and an unshakable belief in himself. He wasn't the best student. He preferred energy and creativity to sitting in classrooms. But he understood something that his professors never taught. Success in America wasn't just about what you knew. It was about who you knew and how hard you were willing to work to get noticed. While still a student, Combs landed an unpaid internship at Uptown Records, a label that was helping to shape the sound of urban music in the early 90s. Most interns would have been content to fetch coffee and make copies. Sean Combs was not most interns. He arrived early, stayed late, studied everything. He watched how the executives moved, how they talked, how they made decisions. He absorbed the rhythms of the music business like a sponge soaking up water. Within months, he had gone from unpaid intern to talent director. Within a few years, he was an artists and repertoire executive, one of the youngest in the industry. At Uptown, he helped produce albums for Father MC, Heavy D and the Boys, and a young singer named Mary J. Blige, whose debut album, What's the 411, would become a landmark in rhythm and blues music. His production style was unlike anything the industry had seen. It was bold, it was flashy, it was unapologetically commercial, and it worked. But in 1993, Andre Harrell, the founder of Uptown Records, made a decision that would change the course of music history. He fired Sean Combs. The reasons were never entirely clear. Some said Combs had become too ambitious, too hungry, too difficult to control. Whatever the reason, being fired from Uptown was the best thing that ever happened to Sean Combs, because it forced him to do what he had always dreamed of doing. He started his own label. With leverage from his success at Uptown and a reputation for spotting talent, Combs negotiated a deal with Arista Records worth between $10 and $15 million. He called his new company Bad Boy Records, and the first artist he signed would change hip-hop forever. Christopher Wallace was a 300-pound drug dealer from Brooklyn with a gift for storytelling that bordered on the supernatural. He called himself Biggie Smalls. The world would come to know him as the notorious B.I.G. When Combs heard Biggie's demo tape, he knew immediately that he was listening to greatness. The flow, the wordplay, the raw honesty about street life. It was unlike anything else in hip-hop. In 1994, Bad Boy released its first major projects. Craig Mack's Flava in Ya Ear became a surprise hit, but it was Biggie's debut album Ready to Die that truly announced Bad Boy's arrival. The album was a masterpiece. Songs like Juicy and Big Papa became instant classics, and Biggie became one of the biggest stars in music almost overnight. Combs wasn't just Biggie's label head. He was his producer, his manager, his mentor, and his friend. The two men complemented each other perfectly. Biggie brought the raw talent and street authenticity. Combs brought the business acumen and the vision to make hip-hop truly mainstream. By 1995, Bad Boy Records was dominating the charts. The label signed more artists: Faith Evans, Total, 112, The Lox, Mace. Each one found success under Combs's guidance. His production style, which blended samples from classic soul and disco records with hard-hitting beats, became the defining sound of East Coast hip-hop. But success brought enemies. On the West Coast, Death Row Records was building its own empire. Its CEO, Suge Knight, was everything Combs was not. Where Combs was smooth and corporate, Knight was intimidating and volatile. And when tensions between the coasts erupted into open warfare, Bad Boy found itself at the center of hip-hop's deadliest conflict. The feud between East and West became personal when Tupac Shakur, who had recently signed with Death Row, accused Combs and Biggie of being involved in a 1994 shooting that left him wounded at a New York recording studio. Biggie and Combs denied any involvement, but Tupac wasn't interested in denials. In September of 1996, Tupac was shot and killed in Las Vegas. He was 25 years old. 6 months later, in March of 1997, tragedy struck again. The notorious B.I.G., just 24 years old, was shot and killed in Los Angeles. He was leaving a music industry party when a car pulled up beside his SUV. The shooter fired 4 rounds. Biggie died less than an hour later. Both murders remain officially unsolved. The loss devastated Combs. Biggie wasn't just his biggest artist. He was his closest friend. The two had built an empire together, and now Combs had to face a future without the man who had helped make it all possible. But from the ashes of tragedy, Combs built something extraordinary. Later that year, he released his own debut album, No Way Out. The lead single, I'll Be Missing You, was a tribute to Biggie. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming the first hip-hop song ever to enter the chart at the top spot. The album sold over 7 million copies in the United States alone. Combs, now performing under the name Puff Daddy, became a superstar in his own right. He won a Grammy for Best Rap Album. He appeared in music videos that were more like short films. He became the face of hip-hop's transition from underground art form to mainstream cultural force. And as his fame grew, so did his appetite for luxury. He started a clothing line called Sean John that would eventually be valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. He opened restaurants. He bought properties. He dated some of the most famous women in the world, including Jennifer Lopez, whose relationship with Combs made them one of the most photographed couples of the late 90s. By the early 2000s, Sean Combs had transformed himself from a kid from Harlem into one of the richest and most influential figures in entertainment. Forbes estimated his net worth at over $500 million. He had homes in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. He threw legendary parties where celebrities rubbed shoulders with athletes, politicians, and royalty. And then he set his sights on Atlanta. Atlanta in the early 2000s was experiencing a renaissance. The city had always been a hub of black culture and commerce, but hip-hop was transforming it into the new capital of American music. Producers like Jermaine Dupri and artists like Outkast and Usher were putting Atlanta on the map as the creative center of urban music. For Diddy, Atlanta represented opportunity, not just for his music business, but for his expanding empire of restaurants, nightlife, and real estate. In 1997, he had opened the first location of Justin's, a restaurant named after his firstborn son, in New York City. The Atlanta location followed in 1998, setting up shop in the heart of Buckhead, the city's most upscale neighborhood. Justin's became the place to be seen. The restaurant served Caribbean and Southern cuisine that critics praised, but its real appeal was the clientele. On any given night, you might spot athletes, musicians, actors, and local celebrities dining under the soft lighting and elegant decor. The restaurant hosted private parties, impromptu concerts, and events that went late into the night. At the height of its popularity, Justin's was more than a restaurant. It was a cultural institution. It helped launch the careers of chefs who would go on to open their own acclaimed establishments. It gave Atlanta a taste of the glamour and excess that Diddy represented. By 2003, Diddy was ready to expand his Atlanta footprint even further. He had been spending time in the city, building relationships, exploring opportunities, and he found something that captured his imagination. A mansion unlike anything he had ever seen. The property sat in Dunwoody, a quiet, upscale suburb just north of Atlanta. It had been built in 1987 in the Italian Baroque style, with soaring columns, ornate moldings, and architectural details that evoked the grand palaces of Europe. At over 20,000 square feet, it was enormous. The main house contained 8 bedrooms and 16 bathrooms. Several of those bathrooms featured showers, jacuzzi tubs, and steam showers. The estate included a library filled with custom shelving, a game room where guests could unwind, a gourmet kitchen with multiple preparation areas and top-of-the-line appliances, a wine cellar stocked with rare vintages, a home theater with plush seating for private screenings, 5 working fireplaces scattered throughout the house, each one hand-carved and unique, a personal gym, multiple saunas for relaxation. Outside the property was equally impressive. A massive saltwater swimming pool with a connected pool house and barbecue area, an expansive deck perfect for entertaining, a 5-car garage to house a collection of luxury vehicles, and all of it sat on more than 7 acres of private land, surrounded by trees that provided complete seclusion from the outside world. The previous owner was H.J. Newton, a businessman who owned car dealerships throughout Georgia and Tennessee. Newton had purchased the property in April 2001 for $1.5 million. Now he was ready to sell. In 2003, Sean Combs purchased the mansion for $2.6 million. At the time, he already owned Justin's restaurant in Buckhead. He also had another property in Fayetteville, Georgia. But this Dunwoody estate was different. This was going to be something special. The plans were ambitious. Diddy wanted to transform the already luxurious mansion into a showpiece that reflected his status and taste. He hired contractors and designers. He began extensive renovations that would take years to complete. His then-girlfriend, model and businesswoman Kim Porter, helped oversee the decoration of the house, choosing furnishings and finishes that blended European elegance with modern luxury. The renovation project stretched into 2004. That January, the property made local headlines when Diddy sought a zoning change that would allow him to subdivide part of the land into a development of 11 single-family houses. It was an ambitious real estate play that would have multiplied the value of his investment, but the proposed zoning change was finally denied. Local residents and officials weren't interested in seeing the quiet neighborhood transformed by development. Still, the work on the mansion continued. Diddy poured money into the project. By some estimates, The renovations pushed the appraised value of the property to a staggering $5.2 million. The house was becoming exactly what he had envisioned, a palace fit for a king of hip-hop. And then everything stopped. The details of what happened next remain murky. Some accounts say the renovations continued until 2007. Others suggest they ended earlier. What everyone agrees on is this. At some point in the mid-2000s, Sean Combs walked away from the mansion. He simply abandoned it, stopped the construction, fired the workers, locked the doors, and never came back. The timing was curious. This was a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a man who owned properties across the country and around the world, a man who had never been known to walk away from anything. So why would he abandon a mansion he had invested so much time and money into transforming? Some investigators point to the 2008 housing crisis as a possible explanation. When the American real estate market collapsed, even wealthy investors found themselves unable to secure financing for renovation projects. Construction loans dried up, property values plummeted. What had seemed like a smart investment suddenly became a liability. But there might have been other reasons that had nothing to do with money. Kim Porter, the woman who had helped decorate the mansion, had a complicated relationship with Diddy. They had been together on and off since 1994. She had given birth to their son Christian in 1998. But their relationship had been marked by periods of separation, including a painful split in 1999 when Diddy began dating Jennifer Lopez. They reconciled in 2003, around the time he purchased the Atlanta mansion. In 2006, they welcomed twin daughters, Delilah and Jessie. The house in Dunwoody was supposed to be part of their future together, a place where they could raise their family, a retreat from the chaos of Diddy's increasingly complicated life. But that same year, everything fell apart again. Kim discovered that Diddy had fathered a child with another woman, Sarah Chapman, while Kim was still pregnant with the twins. The betrayal was too much. In 2007, they split for good. And with that split, any dreams of the Atlanta mansion becoming a family home died. In 2007, Diddy sold the property. The buyer was Paramount Group Incorporated, a real estate investment trust company. The sale price was $1.3 million, half of what he had paid for it. A loss of over $1 million, not counting the hundreds of thousands he had poured into renovations. It was a stunning financial move for a man known for his business acumen. But perhaps money wasn't the real concern. Perhaps the mansion had simply become too painful, too connected to a future that would never happen, too haunted by memories of what might have been. After the sale, the new owners did nothing with the property. The mansion sat empty. The renovations remained unfinished, and slowly, inevitably, decay set in. The first signs were small. A broken window left unrepaired, a garden left unweeded, a gate left unlocked. But neglect has a way of compounding. Water seeped through cracks in the roof. Mold began to spread through the walls. Paint peeled. Wood rotted. The grand staircase, once a showpiece of the home's entrance, began to lose its ornate iron railings. Then came the vandals. Word spread through certain communities that the abandoned mansion was easy pickings. Copper pipes, which could be sold for scrap, were stripped from the walls. Light fixtures disappeared. Anything of value that wasn't bolted down was taken, and what couldn't be taken was destroyed. Graffiti appeared on the walls. Names and dates and crude drawings spray-painted over plaster that had once been pristine white. Outside, nature began its slow reclamation. The The pool, which had once sparkled under the Georgia sun, turned green with algae. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the deck. Vines crawled up the columns. The carefully landscaped grounds became a jungle of overgrowth. Inside, the emptiness was suffocating. Room after room of nothing. The library shelves stood bare. The wine cellar was dry and dusty. The home theater seats were covered in grime. The fireplaces held only cobwebs and debris. And in the basement, something strange. Explorers who ventured into the darkness found what appeared to be an unfinished recording studio. Half-built walls, exposed wiring, soundproofing material still in its packaging. It was as if someone had been in the middle of creating something and simply walked away, never to return. For over a decade, the mansion remained frozen in this state of arrested decay. A monument to abandonment, a palace left to rot. In 2012, Justin's restaurant closed its doors permanently after 14 years in Buckhead. Bad Boy Entertainment confirmed the closure, saying Diddy wanted to pursue other business ventures in music, television, fashion, and spirits. The mansion had already been abandoned for 5 years. Atlanta, it seemed, had been left behind. But the mansion's story was far from over. In 2022, urban explorer Leland Kent documented the property under the name Abandoned Southeast. What he discovered and photographed became a viral sensation. Images of the once grand foyer, its chandelier still hanging overhead but now coated in dust. The sweeping staircase with its missing railings. The vast kitchen, abandoned mid-renovation. The swimming pool transformed into a murky pond of stagnation. The photographs captured something haunting. Not just a house, but a dream that had died. Every image seemed to ask the same question. What happened here? Why would anyone abandon something so beautiful? The reason Combs abandoned the property remains unknown, Kent wrote. It is rumored that he planned to renovate the mansion. However, due to the 2008 housing crisis, funding became an issue. The property was later sold at auction in 2012. Justin's restaurant closed that same year. Another explorer, Jeremy Abbott, ventured into the mansion's depths. This place is quite the mystery, he observed. Diddy purchased the mansion for $2.6 million, but after 4 years of extensive renovations, he suddenly sold it for $1.3 million. Half of what he paid for it. The mansion in Dunwoody still stands today, a shell of its former glory, a monument to dreams never fulfilled. And somewhere in those empty rooms, in the dust and the silence and the decay, there are secrets. Secrets about what this place was meant to be. Secrets about why it was abandoned. Secrets that, like so many others in the story of Sean Combs, may never fully come to light. For years, the mansion in Dunwoody existed in a kind of purgatory, forgotten by most, known only to a handful of urban explorers who traded photographs and whispered stories about the hip-hop mogul's abandoned palace. The neighbors had grown accustomed to its presence. The once grand estate that had promised to bring celebrity glamour to their quiet suburb had instead become an eyesore. A reminder of plans that never materialized, of promises never kept. But in 2022, everything changed. Leland Kent, an urban explorer who documented abandoned properties across the American South under the name Abandoned Southeast, stumbled upon the decaying estate during one of his regular expeditions. He had heard rumors about the property for years. Everyone in the urban exploration community knew about the mogul's mansion. But actually standing before it, camera in hand, was something else entirely. What he found took his breath away. 20,000 square feet of faded grandeur, chandeliers still hanging from ceilings, coated in years of dust and cobwebs. A sweeping staircase with its iron railings stripped away by scavengers. A swimming pool turned into a swamp of green algae and dead leaves. Kent photographed everything. The empty wine cellar with its racks standing bare, waiting for bottles that would never arrive. The abandoned home theater where seats designed for 35 guests sat covered in grime and debris. The fireplaces, once designed to warm rooms filled with laughter and music, now holding only cobwebs and the remnants of squatters who had briefly made the mansion their home. And deep in the basement, something unexpected. An unfinished recording studio. Exposed wiring hung from the ceiling like mechanical vines. Soundproofing material sat unopened in its packaging, the plastic still sealed. Framing for what might have been isolation booths stood skeletal against the concrete walls. It was as if construction had stopped mid-breath, frozen in time. Someone had been building something down here. Something that was never completed. Something that would never be used. The photographs went viral. Millions of people who had grown up listening to Puff Daddy's music, who had watched him accept awards and launch fashion lines and build an empire, suddenly saw another side of his story. A side that raised uncomfortable questions. Why would one of the richest men in hip-hop walk away from a property worth millions? What secrets did this abandoned mansion hold? At the time, the question seemed almost quaint. A celebrity mystery. A curiosity for internet sleuths and true crime enthusiasts. But within 2 years, those questions would take on a much darker significance. Because in November of 2023, the first crack appeared in Sean Combs's carefully constructed empire. Her name was Cassandra Ventura. The world knew her as Cassie. She had been an R&B singer signed to Bad Boy Records back in 2005, when she was just 19 years old and Sean Combs was 37. Their professional relationship had evolved into a romantic one that lasted, off and on, for more than a decade. And according to the lawsuit she filed in federal court in New York, that relationship had been marked by horrific abuse. The lawsuit painted a portrait of a vicious and cruel man who had asserted complete control over her personal and professional life. According to the filing, Combs had repeatedly beaten her, punched her, kicked her, stomped on her. The violence left bruises and black eyes and burst lips that took weeks to heal. But the physical abuse, as devastating as it was, represented only part of the nightmare Cassie described. The lawsuit alleged something else. Something that would become central to understanding who Sean Combs really was. According to Cassie, Combs had forced her to participate in what he called freak-offs. These were elaborate sexual performances involving male commercial sex workers that Combs would arrange, direct, and often electronically record. The encounters could last for days at a time, fueled by drugs and alcohol that Combs allegedly used to keep his victims compliant and obedient. The lawsuit described Cassie's terror, how she had felt that saying no to Combs would cost her something, her family, her friends, her career, perhaps even her life. She described a man who kept recordings of the freak-offs as leverage, who threatened to release the footage if she ever tried to leave or speak out, who had blown up rapper Kid Cudi's car in 2012 after discovering that Cudi had shown romantic interest in Cassie. The lawsuit was settled the very next day. Cassie received $20 million. The terms were confidential, and for a moment, it seemed like the matter might disappear. Another secret buried under the weight of money and power and non-disclosure agreements. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried. In the months following Cassie's lawsuit, more accusers came forward. One woman alleged that Combs and two other men had gang-raped her when she was 17 years old. Another accused him of sexual assault. A male music producer named Rodney Jones filed a lawsuit claiming Combs had coerced him into sexual situations with prostitutes and subjected him to harassment and unwanted touching. Combs denied everything. "Enough is enough," he wrote on social media. "For the last couple of weeks, I have sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth." But the truth, it turned out, was about to be revealed in the most visceral way possible. On May 17, 2024, CNN aired footage that would shock the world. Hotel surveillance video from March of 2016 showed Sean Combs attacking Cassie Ventura in the hallway of the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Combs, wearing only a white towel, grabbed Ventura and threw her to the ground. He kicked her, dragged her by her hooded sweatshirt while she lay helpless on the floor, threw objects at her. The violence was methodical and brutal. For years, Combs had denied ever laying hands on the women in his life. For years, his lawyers had dismissed the allegations as baseless and outrageous lies. But there was no denying what millions of people could now see with their own eyes. The mask had finally slipped. Within days, Combs posted an apology video. "I hit rock bottom, but I make no excuses," he said. "My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I was disgusted then when I did it. I am disgusted now." But the apology came too late. The machinery of justice had already begun to move. 2 months before the video surfaced, in March of 2024, federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security had executed coordinated raids on Combs's properties. Helicopters filled the sky over his $40 million mansion in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. The sounds of rotors echoed through the exclusive enclave where celebrities had long believed themselves untouchable. Armed agents in tactical gear swarmed his Star Island estate in Miami Beach, a property on one of the most exclusive addresses in America. The raids were connected to a sex trafficking investigation being led out of the Southern District of New York. Witnesses described the scene as something out of a movie. Agents with weapons drawn, family members briefly detained. A property that had hosted some of the most famous people in the world suddenly transformed into a crime scene. The message was unmistakable. No amount of wealth or fame would provide protection from federal law enforcement. The agents searched for hours, methodically going through room after room, closet after closet, drawer after drawer. When they finally departed, they carried with them a trove of evidence: narcotics, 3 AR-15 rifles with their serial numbers defaced, and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, items that prosecutors would later describe as essential supplies for the freak-offs that Combs allegedly orchestrated. On September 16, 2024, Sean Combs was arrested at a Manhattan hotel. The federal indictment charged him with 3 counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The charges carried a potential sentence of life in prison. At his arraignment, Combs pleaded not guilty. His lawyers offered a $50 million bond for his release. They proposed home detention with GPS monitoring, travel restrictions, anything to keep their client out of jail while he awaited trial. The judge denied every request, citing concerns about witness intimidation and flight risk. She ordered Combs held without bail at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. The trial began on May 12, 2025. For 7 weeks, prosecutors laid out their case against one of the most powerful figures in entertainment history. They described an elaborate criminal enterprise that had operated for 2 decades, an organization that used Combs' music empire to facilitate abuse, trafficking, and exploitation on a massive scale. Cassie Ventura took the witness stand and testified for 4 agonizing days. She described the freak-offs in graphic detail, how they could last up to 4 days at a time, how Combs would direct the action, telling her what positions to assume, how long to continue, how she was given drugs like MDMA and ketamine to lower her inhibitions and keep her compliant, how afterward she and Combs would receive intravenous fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. She testified about the beatings, the black eyes, the bruises that covered her body. She described how Combs had threatened to release recordings of the freak-offs if she ever tried to leave him. How she had felt trapped, terrorized, unable to escape the man who controlled every aspect of her life. In text messages shown to the jury, Cassie had written to Combs about the toll his behavior was taking. "I give you love," she wrote, "and as soon as I turn my head for a second and you get messed up, you drag me down the hall by my hair." In another message, she compared him to Ike Turner, the notoriously abusive partner of singer Tina Turner. "Nothing good comes out of freak-offs anymore," she wrote. "You treat me like you are Ike Turner." Another woman testified under the pseudonym Jane. She described similar patterns of abuse and coercion. She told the jury how Combs had threatened to release sex tapes of her if she did not comply with his demands. How he told her he had nothing to lose. How she had lived in constant fear of what he might do. Former employees took the stand and described the inner workings of Combs's organization. How staff members were expected to arrange the freak-offs, book hotel rooms, stock them with supplies, clean up afterward, deliver cash payments to sex workers, schedule intravenous fluid deliveries for recovery. The enterprise had been elaborate, coordinated, and designed to serve Combs' every desire. The jury saw still images from the freak-off recordings that Combs had kept on his phones. They heard testimony from other victims who described similar patterns of abuse. They watched the hotel surveillance footage again and again. And on July 2, 2025, they returned their verdict. Not guilty on the most serious charges. The jury acquitted Combs of racketeering conspiracy. They acquitted him of sex trafficking involving Cassie Ventura and another unidentified woman. But on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, charges that stemmed from his transporting women across state lines for the freak-offs, they found him guilty. The verdict was mixed. Neither a complete victory for the prosecution nor a vindication for Combs. His lawyers celebrated the acquittals on the life sentence charges. Prosecutors pointed to the convictions as proof of his criminal conduct, and the victims who had come forward found themselves processing a complicated result. Cassie Ventura's attorney released a statement praising her courage for coming forward in the first place. "She paved the way," he said. Her civil complaint in November of 2023 had set everything in motion. Whatever the verdict, she had forced a reckoning that many thought would never come. Other voices were less forgiving. One juror who spoke afterward said he believed Combs had gotten off easy. 10 years would have been more appropriate, he said. And indeed, there was something unsatisfying about the outcome. A man who had been accused of running a criminal enterprise for 20 years, who had allegedly terrorized and abused women for decades, would serve only a few years in prison. But for those who had watched powerful men escape accountability time and time again, even this partial victory felt significant. Sean Combs would go to prison. He would be held accountable in some measure for his actions, and that, in the world of celebrity justice, was more than many had dared to hope for. On October 3, 2025, Judge Arun Subramanian pronounced sentence: 50 months in federal prison, a $500,000 fine, 5 years of supervised release after his incarceration. Given credit for time already served since his arrest the previous September, Combs would spend roughly 3 more years behind bars. Before the sentence was read, Combs addressed the court. "I have been humbled and broken to my core," he said through tears. He called his actions disgusting, shameful, and sick. He apologized to his victims, to his family, to everyone he had hurt. The judge was unmoved. To Ms. Ventura and the other brave survivors that came forward, Subramanian said, "I want to say first, we heard you." And somewhere in the suburbs of Atlanta, the abandoned mansion in Dunwoody continued its slow decay. A monument to a different era, a time when Sean Combs had seemed invincible, when his wealth and fame and power appeared to place him above consequences, when magazines called him a mogul and a visionary and a self-made man, when politicians posed for photographs with him and presented him with keys to cities. That Sean Combs had purchased the mansion in 2003 with visions of grandeur. He had imagined hosting parties there, recording music in that basement studio, raising his children in those sprawling rooms, building a legacy that would outlast his music and his business ventures and even his own life. Instead, the mansion became a prophecy, a warning of what happens when ambition is unmoored from conscience, when power is used not to elevate but to destroy, when the desire for control consumes everything in its path. The mansion had been purchased during the height of his success, 2003. The same year he launched the Sean John clothing line to critical acclaim. The same year he was riding high on the success of album after album, hit after hit. He had walked through those empty rooms and imagined a future filled with possibility, a home for his family, a retreat from the pressures of his empire, a place where he could finally rest. But rest had never been part of Sean Combs's nature. The same relentless drive that had propelled him from the streets of Harlem to the pinnacle of the entertainment industry had also driven him toward darker impulses, the freak-offs, the violence, the control, the desperate need to possess and dominate everyone in his orbit. Looking back now, the abandoned mansion seems almost prophetic, a preview of the ruin to come, those half-finished renovations, that unfinished recording studio in the basement, the dreams that had been started but never completed. Just as Combs himself had been unable to finish what he started in Atlanta, he had been unable to build a life that could sustain itself, unable to construct relationships based on love rather than control, unable to create anything permanent. Urban explorers still visit the property today. They photograph the crumbling staircase and the empty pool and the graffiti-covered walls. They speculate about what might have been. They wonder about the secrets that still linger in those abandoned rooms. Some say the mansion is haunted, that the ghost of notorious B.I.G. wanders the halls, forcing Combs to confront the violence and tragedy that have marked his entire life. Others dismiss such stories as superstition, but there is something undeniably eerie about the property. Something that speaks to waste and loss and the wages of ambition unchecked by conscience. The abandoned mansion in Dunwoody was never just a house. It was a mirror, a reflection of the man who owned it and the empire he built. Grand on the surface, impressive from a distance. But underneath, something was deeply wrong. Foundations that could not hold. Structures that would eventually collapse under their own weight. Sean Combs will be released from federal prison sometime in 2028. He will be in his late 50s. His empire, once valued at nearly $1 billion, has been decimated by legal fees and settlements and the collapse of his public reputation. The Bad Boy Records legacy that he spent 30 years building has been permanently tarnished. The clothing lines, the vodka brands, the television ventures, all of it overshadowed by the revelations of what he did behind closed doors. His children, 7 of them, will have spent years watching their father's name dragged through courtrooms and headlines. The eldest, Justin, was handcuffed outside the Los Angeles mansion during the federal raid. The twins, Delilah and Jesse, were teenagers when their father was arrested. They submitted letters to the court before his sentencing, pleading for leniency, describing the father they loved. But no letter could erase what the jury had heard, what the world had seen. Kim Porter, who had once dreamed of making the Atlanta mansion a family home, had died in 2018. She never lived to see her former partner's downfall. Perhaps that was a mercy. She had already endured years of his infidelity and manipulation. She had already lived through the pain of discovering his betrayal while pregnant with their twins. She was spared the final chapter. The victims who came forward will carry their trauma forever. Cassie Ventura wrote in a letter to the judge that she still has nightmares and flashbacks on a regular, everyday basis. She moved her family away from New York, terrified of retaliation. Even with Combs behind bars, she lives in fear. The psychological damage of years of abuse does not disappear with a prison sentence, and the mansion will still stand. Decaying, forgotten. A monument to dreams that turned to nightmares. A palace built by a king who could not escape his own darkness. The water continues to seep through the cracks in the roof. The mold continues to spread through the walls. Nature continues its slow reclamation of the grounds. In another decade, perhaps 2, the structure may finally become unsafe, may finally be demolished, may finally disappear. But the story will remain. The story of a young man from Harlem who lost his father to violence and built an empire from nothing. The story of the women who suffered in silence before finally finding the courage to speak. The story of a justice system that, however imperfectly, eventually held the powerful accountable. And the story of a mansion in the suburbs of Atlanta that was purchased for $2.6 million, abandoned without explanation, and left to rot. A mystery that seemed so small when it first captured the public's attention, but which turned out to be a window into something much larger and much darker. The gates of the property remain locked. Warning signs advise trespassers to stay away. But the curious still come. They peer through the fence at the overgrown grounds and the decaying facade. They try to imagine what the house looked like in its prime. They wonder what happened within those walls, and they ask themselves the same question that has haunted this story from the beginning. What secrets are still hidden in the abandoned mansion of Sean Diddy Combs? Some secrets, perhaps, are better left buried. But the truth has a way of rising to the surface. It may take years, it may take decades, but eventually, inevitably, the truth finds its way into the light. Just as Cassie Ventura's lawsuit in 2023 broke the dam of silence that had protected Sean Combs for decades. Just as the hotel surveillance video showed the world what had been hidden behind closed doors. Just as the federal investigation uncovered the elaborate network that had facilitated years of alleged abuse. The truth always emerges. The abandoned mansion in Dunwoody is part of that truth. A physical manifestation of everything that went wrong, of dreams that became nightmares, of ambition that curdled into something dark and destructive, of a man who seemed to have everything and yet could never be satisfied. Visitors to the property today describe an overwhelming sense of sadness. The mansion feels like a grave, one explorer wrote. Like something died here. And perhaps something did. Perhaps the person Sean Combs might have become died in these rooms. Perhaps the future he might have built with Kim Porter and their children died here. Perhaps hope itself died here, replaced by the compulsions and cruelties that would ultimately define his legacy. The abandoned mansion waits. And in the silence of those empty rooms, in the darkness of that unfinished basement, in the ruins of a dream that was never meant to be, the echoes of the past continue to whisper. This was the house that Diddy built, and this is how it fell.